Rain pounded against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thompson estate in Northern California. Blake Thompson sat alone in his dimly lit living room, his 6-foot frame hunched over a leather photo album. The mansion's 10,000 square feet had never felt more empty. Today marked 6 months since Sarah's passing, and the silence was deafening. The living room, with its modern decor and neutral tones, remained exactly as Sarah had designed it. A half-empty whiskey glass sat on the coffee table, next to scattered photographs that Blake had been examining for hours. Each image showed Sarah's radiant smile, at the beach house in Malibu, during their ski trip to Aspen, at the charity gala where they'd first met 3 years ago. Blake's fingers traced the edge of a particular photo, taken just 2 weeks before the accident. Sarah wore her favorite blue dress, her blonde hair catching the sunset light as she laughed at something he'd said. He couldn't remember the joke now, but he remembered her laugh, clear and uninhibited, like everything else about her. The housekeeping staff had left weeks ago at his insistence. He couldn't bear their pitying glances or their careful attempts to tidy away Sarah's belongings. Her reading glasses still lay on the side table where she'd left them. Her collection of art books remained stacked by her favorite armchair. Even her coffee mug, with a lipstick stain on the rim, stayed untouched in the kitchen cabinet. Thunder crashed outside, startling Blake. His hand jerked, knocking over the whiskey glass. The amber liquid spread across the coffee table, seeping into the scattered photographs. "Damn it," he growled, his voice hoarse from disuse. In his rush to save the photos, his trembling hands scattered more items across the floor. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the empty room as the whiskey tumbler hit the hardwood floor. Blake stared at the broken pieces, his chest tight with anger and grief. The mess before him seemed to mirror his internal state, scattered, broken, irreparable. Standing abruptly, Blake strode to the window. His reflection stared back at him, unshaven, hair unkempt, dark circles under his eyes. At 35, he'd built a tech empire worth billions, but none of that mattered now. He couldn't buy back what he'd lost. His phone buzzed on the table, probably his assistant again, trying to coax him back to the office. Or worse, his sister Claire, with another well-meaning but unwanted attempt to help him move on. He ignored it. As he watched the rain, Blake realized he couldn't continue like this. The solitude he'd craved after Sarah's death had become a prison. The house needed attention. Sarah would have hated seeing it in this state. She'd always kept their home immaculate, warm, and inviting. With heavy steps, Blake walked to his study and opened his laptop. The screen's harsh light illuminated his tired face as he typed out a short email to his HR department. "Find me a housekeeper. Someone discreet, professional. Starting immediately." He hit send before he could change his mind. The thought of a stranger in their space made his stomach turn, but he needed help. Sarah would have wanted the house to remain a home, not become a mausoleum to their lost future. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows as Blake returned to the living room. He bent down to collect the broken glass, cutting his finger in the process. The sharp pain felt almost welcome, a different sensation from the constant ache in his chest. Little did Blake know, this small decision to hire help would set in motion events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and moving forward. But for now, he simply sat in the growing darkness, holding a bloody tissue to his finger, surrounded by the fragments of his old life. The morning Maya arrived, fog clung to the California hills surrounding the Thompson estate. Blake stood in his office, watching through the window as a modest Honda Civic pulled up to the gate. His fingers drummed nervously against his desk. This was the first new person he'd allowed into his space in months. The security guard buzzed her through after checking her credentials. Blake's breath caught in his throat as she stepped out of the car. Even from this distance, the resemblance was uncanny. Same height, same graceful way of moving, even a similar shade of blonde hair. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating. Mrs. Rodriguez, his HR director, had handled the hiring process. She'd sent over Maya's paperwork, 26 years old, excellent references, background check clean. Nothing in the file had prepared him for this. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the empty house. Blake took several deep breaths before heading downstairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. When he opened the door, the similarity hit him like a physical blow. "Mr. Thompson." "I'm Maya Chen," she said, extending her hand. Her voice was different, a slight hint of a West Coast accent, nothing like Sarah's East Coast sophistication. But her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners. Blake realized he'd been staring. He forced himself to shake her hand, maintaining a professional distance. "Come in," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. "I'll show you around." The tour was mechanical, with Blake pointing out rooms and explaining basic procedures. Maya listened attentively, taking notes in a small notebook. She asked intelligent questions about his preferences, schedule, and expectations. All the while, Blake struggled to look directly at her. "The kitchen needs the most attention," he said, gesturing to the accumulated dishes and takeout containers. "I haven't, it's been." He trailed off, unable to explain. "I understand," Maya said softly. "I'll start here." Over the next few weeks, Maya moved through the house like a quiet force of nature. Dishes disappeared from the sink, surfaces gleamed, and fresh air replaced the stale atmosphere. She worked efficiently, respecting Blake's privacy while gradually bringing order to chaos. Blake observed these changes from a distance, retreating to his office whenever possible. But Maya's presence was impossible to ignore entirely. Sometimes he'd catch a glimpse of her in his peripheral vision, arranging flowers in the living room or dusting the bookshelves, and his heart would stop for a split second before reality reasserted itself. One morning, Blake came downstairs to find the kitchen transformed. The morning light streamed through newly cleaned windows, and the scent of coffee filled the air. Maya had organized Sarah's cookbook collection, which had been scattered across the counters. They were now neatly arranged on the shelf, except for one that lay open on the counter. "I hope you don't mind," Maya said, noticing his attention on the cookbook. "I found her recipe for banana bread. I thought, well, there were some overripe bananas, and it seemed a shame to waste them." The cookbook was open to a page marked with Sarah's handwriting, little notes in the margins about adding extra vanilla. Blake stared at the familiar scrawl until the letters blurred together. "Mr. Thompson." Maya's voice seemed to come from far away. "I can put it back if you'd prefer." "No," he said abruptly, turning away. "Do whatever you think best. That's what I'm paying you for." He retreated to his office, leaving Maya standing in the kitchen with the cookbook. Through his closed door, he could smell the banana bread baking, exactly the way Sarah used to make it. The familiar aroma brought a flood of memories: Sunday mornings, Sarah in her pajamas, flour on her cheek. Later that day, Blake noticed a small detail that would change everything. As Maya reached up to clean a high shelf, something glinted at her throat. A delicate silver necklace with a distinctive pendant, one he'd last seen around Sarah's neck the day she died. The discovery of Sarah's necklace around Maya's neck haunted Blake for days. He found himself watching her more closely, not just because of her resemblance to Sarah now, but trying to understand who she really was. The question of the necklace burned in his mind, but he couldn't bring himself to ask about it. One evening, as storm clouds gathered outside, Blake found Maya in the library, carefully dusting the shelves of first editions Sarah had collected. She was humming softly, not one of Sarah's songs, he noted. Something different, melancholic. "That's an interesting necklace," Blake finally said, his voice breaking the silence. Maya's hand instinctively went to the silver pendant. "It was my mother's," she replied, turning to face him. For the first time, Blake forced himself to look at her properly, beyond the surface resemblance to Sarah. Her eyes were different, dark brown instead of blue, with a depth of sadness he recognized from his own mirror. "Would you like some tea?" Maya offered, perhaps sensing his unusual willingness to talk. Blake nodded, following her to the kitchen. As she prepared the tea, she continued speaking, her voice quiet but steady. "My mother passed away last year. Cancer. This necklace was one of the few things I could keep after selling most of our belongings to pay the medical bills." She placed a cup of Earl Grey in front of him, Sarah's favorite, though he hadn't told her that. "I'm working here to pay for my night classes," Maya continued. "I'm studying architecture. Mom always wanted me to finish school, but life got in the way." She smiled sadly. "Now it's just me and my student loans." Blake found himself sharing in return, surprising himself. Sarah loved architecture. She designed most of this house's renovation. The words came easier than expected. She had a way of making spaces feel alive. "I can tell," Maya said, looking around the kitchen. "Every room has intention, purpose. It's not just beautiful, it's thoughtful." She understood exactly what he meant, And for the first time since Sarah's death, Blake felt truly heard. They talked for hours. Blake learned about Maya's childhood in Oakland, her mother's struggle as a single parent, her dreams of designing sustainable housing for low-income communities. She spoke with passion and intelligence, qualities that were entirely her own, distinctly different from Sarah. However, as their conversation deepened and the hour grew late, Blake felt an uncomfortable stirring in his chest. Maya's genuine warmth, her quiet strength, he was attracted to her, not as a ghost of Sarah, but as herself. The realization filled him with guilt and confusion. That night, his dreams were vivid and disturbing. Sarah stood before him in their bedroom, wearing the silver necklace. "How could you?" she accused, her voice cold and unfamiliar. "She's nothing like me." Blake woke in a cold sweat, his heart racing. The next morning, he avoided Maya, unable to reconcile his growing feelings with his loyalty to Sarah's memory. But when he heard her laughing on the phone in the garden, a rich, throaty laugh so different from Sarah's musical giggle, he found himself drawn to the window to watch her. Maya looked up, catching his eye. Instead of looking away, she smiled, not Sarah's smile, but her own, genuine and slightly lopsided. Blake felt something shift inside him, like ice beginning to thaw. But before he could process these new emotions, his phone buzzed. A text from his sister Claire, coming to visit. "We need to talk about what's going on with you and the help. This isn't healthy." Blake stared at the message, his momentary peace shattered. Claire had always been protective, especially since Sarah's death. But how could he explain something he didn't understand himself? How could he tell her that for the first time in months, he felt like he might be ready to live again, and that terrified him more than dying? Claire Thompson arrived at the estate like an incoming storm, her Mercedes SUV crunching aggressively on the gravel driveway. Blake watched from his office as his sister emerged, designer handbag in one hand, determination etched on her face. At 40, Claire had perfected the art of well-meaning interference, a skill she'd honed since their parents' deaths 10 years ago. "You look better," she said by way of greeting, studying his face in the foyer. Blake had shaved that morning, and his clothes were pressed, Maya's influence, though he wasn't about to mention that. The house too. Almost like. Claire trailed off, her eyes catching movement in the kitchen. Maya appeared in the doorway, a stack of mail in her hands. "Mr. Thompson, your quarterly reports arrived. Would you like them in your office?" Her professional tone couldn't mask the slight tension in her shoulders as she noticed Claire's evaluating stare. "My God," Claire whispered, gripping Blake's arm. She waited until Maya had disappeared upstairs before rounding on her brother. "Have you lost your mind? She could be Sarah's twin." "She's nothing like Sarah," Blake replied, more sharply than intended. "She's just doing her job, Claire." Claire followed him into the living room, her heels clicking purposefully on the hardwood floors. "Her job? Blake, you hired a doppelganger of your dead girlfriend. Do you not see how disturbing that is?" "I didn't hire her because of how she looks," Blake said, though the words felt hollow even to him. "Mrs. Rodriguez handled the hiring." "Fire her," Claire demanded. "I'll find you someone else. Someone more appropriate." "No." The firmness in Blake's voice surprised them both. Claire's expression softened. "Blake, sweetheart, I know you're hurting. But this isn't healthy. She's clearly taking advantage of your vulnerability. Have you seen how she dresses? How she looks at you?" Blake thought of Maya in her simple clothes, her practical shoes, her professional demeanor. She's a student working to pay for architecture school. She's not taking advantage of anything. Architecture? Claire laughed incredulously. "Just like Sarah." "Blake, please. This is textbook manipulation. She probably researched everything about Sarah before applying. That necklace she wears, don't tell me you haven't noticed it's exactly like Sarah's." The mention of the necklace hit a nerve. Blake had been carefully avoiding thinking about it since his conversation with Maya. "It was her mother's," he said defensively. "And you believe that?" Claire's voice dripped with skepticism. "Have you fact-checked anything about her? Or are you so desperate to replace Sarah that you'll believe whatever story this girl feeds you?" Their argument was interrupted by a soft cough. Maya stood in the doorway, her face carefully neutral. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I've finished upstairs, Mr. Thompson." Should I start on the garden, or would you prefer I come back tomorrow? Before Blake could respond, Claire stepped forward. Actually, Maya, let's talk about your background. Where exactly did you say you worked before this? Claire, Blake warned, but his sister ignored him. I have references, Maya said quietly. Mrs. Rodriguez verified them all. Yes, but I'd like to hear it from you. And that lovely necklace, such an interesting piece. Where did you say you got it? The tension in the room was palpable. Maya's hand went to the necklace, her fingers curling protectively around it. For a moment, Blake saw something flash in her eyes, not fear or guilt, but a deep, familiar pain. I don't owe you my life story, Miss Thompson, Maya said, her voice steady. If Mr. Thompson has concerns about my work or my character, he can address them with me directly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to. She left the room with dignity, leaving Blake torn between admiration for her composure and anxiety about the conflict. Claire watched her go, a calculating look in her eyes. Well, Claire said, turning back to Blake. At least we know she's got spine. All the more reason to be careful, brother dear. The last thing you need is another strong-willed woman turning your life upside down. Blake stared out the window, watching Maya cross the garden to the tool shed. The evening light caught her hair, and for once, he didn't see Sarah's ghost. He saw Maya, strong, genuine, and increasingly important to his healing. But Claire's words had planted seeds of doubt he couldn't entirely shake. The question was, what would hurt more, trusting Maya and being wrong, or pushing her away and being right? The confrontation with Claire left Blake restless. That evening, after his sister departed with pointed warnings and concerned glances, he found himself walking through Sarah's old art studio. The room remained untouched, her easel still stood by the window, brushes cleaned and waiting for hands that would never hold them again. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Maya stood in the doorway, holding a small wooden box. Her usual composure seemed shaken. Mr. Thompson, I need to tell you something. Blake gestured for her to enter, noticing how she hesitated before stepping into Sarah's sacred space. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the tension in Maya's features. After your sister's questions, Maya began, turning the box in her hands, I realized I haven't been entirely forthcoming about this. She touched the silver necklace. Blake's chest tightened. You said it was your mother's. It was. But I didn't tell you how she got it. Maya opened the box, revealing a collection of photographs and letters. My mother, Elizabeth Chen, was Sarah's art teacher in college. They remained friends afterward. The revelation hit Blake like a physical blow. He grabbed the edge of Sarah's work table for support. That's impossible. Sarah never mentioned. She wouldn't have, Maya said softly. My mother was very private about their friendship, especially after she got sick. She didn't want Sarah to know about the cancer. She was proud that way. With trembling hands, Maya pulled out a photograph. It showed a younger Sarah, paint-splattered and laughing, with her arm around a petite Asian woman wearing the silver necklace. They stood in front of a gallery exhibition. Sarah gave my mother this necklace after her first successful show, Maya continued. Mom said it was a thank you gift for believing in her when no one else did. When Mom died, she left it to me. She said. Maya's voice caught. She said it would remind me that beauty can come from pain. Blake stared at the photograph, memories flooding back. Sarah had mentioned an influential teacher once, someone who'd pushed her to pursue art seriously. But she'd never used a name, and he'd never pressed for details. Did you know, he asked, his voice hoarse. When you applied for this job, did you know about me and Sarah? Maya shook her head emphatically. No. Mom never told me Sarah's last name. I knew she'd lost touch with her favorite student, but I didn't connect the dots until I saw Sarah's paintings here. Her style, it's so similar to what Mom taught. Blake picked up another photograph from the box. This one showed Sarah and Elizabeth at what appeared to be a cafe, both women bent over a sketchbook. The date on the back was just months before Sarah's death. They did stay in touch, he whispered. Sarah must have known your mother was sick. She did, Maya confirmed. I found this after Mom passed. She handed him a letter, Sarah's familiar handwriting flowing across the page. It was dated 2 weeks before the accident. The letter spoke of Elizabeth's strength, her impact on Sarah's life, and a promise to watch over your brilliant daughter if anything happened. Sarah had known about Maya all along. The irony struck Blake with brutal force. Sarah had died before she could fulfill her promise to Elizabeth, yet here was Maya, in their home, watching over him instead. "I should have told you sooner," Maya said, moving toward the door. "I understand if you want me to leave." "Wait," Blake called out, still holding the letter. A question formed in his mind, one he wasn't sure he wanted answered. "The day you interviewed, did Mrs. Rodriguez show you a picture of Sarah?" "No," Maya replied. "She never mentioned her. I didn't even see a photo until my first day here." She paused, then added quietly, "Maybe some things can't be explained. Mom used to say that art creates connections we don't always understand." Blake looked at the silver necklace again, seeing it differently now. Not as a symbol of loss or manipulation, but as a thread connecting past to present, pain to healing. Yet the revelation left him more confused than ever about his growing feelings for Maya. As she turned to leave, the setting sun caught the necklace, making it gleam. For a moment, Blake could have sworn he saw Sarah's reflection in the window, not with accusation this time, but with something that looked remarkably like approval. The week following Maya's revelation about the necklace passed in a blur of awkward encounters and meaningful glances. Blake found himself standing in his office late one evening, watching Maya tend to Sarah's rose garden through the window. The roses had been dying before Maya arrived, now they bloomed again, much like something else he wasn't ready to name. His phone buzzed, another message from Claire. "Found interesting info about your housemaid. Call me ASAP." He switched it off. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Maya gathered her gardening tools. She looked up, catching his eye through the window. Instead of looking away as he usually did, Blake held her gaze. After a moment's hesitation, he headed downstairs and out to the garden. "Storm's coming," he said, approaching her. Maya nodded, her hands dirty from the soil, a smudge of earth on her cheek. Nothing like Sarah's manicured perfection, yet somehow just as beautiful. "The roses needed pruning," she explained, gesturing to the freshly cut stems. "Dead things have to be cleared away for new growth." The metaphor wasn't lost on Blake. "Maya, about the necklace, about everything." He began, but she cut him off. "Mr. Thompson, Blake," she said, his first name sounding different in her voice. "I've been thinking about leaving. Your sister's right about one thing, this situation is complicated." A drop of rain fell, then another. Neither of them moved. "I read Sarah's letter again last night," Blake said. "The one to your mother. Sarah knew about you, wanted to meet you. She saw something special in you before either of us knew this would happen." Maya's hand went to the necklace. "That doesn't make this right. The way I feel." She stopped abruptly, turning away. The rain fell harder now, but Blake stepped closer. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm betraying everyone," Maya whispered. "My mother, for not telling you sooner. Sarah, for..." She gestured helplessly between them. "And you, because sometimes I forget to see the grief in your eyes, and instead I just see you." Lightning flashed, illuminating the garden. They were both soaked now, but neither moved toward shelter. "I got a call from the university today," Maya said, changing the subject. "They're offering me a scholarship, but I'd have to transfer to their Los Angeles campus. It would solve everything." "Everything?" Blake's voice was rough. "Or would it just be running away?" Before she could answer, the patio doors burst open. Claire stood there, manila folder in hand, triumph on her face. "I knew it. Emergency board meeting about the Robinson merger, and where do I find you?" "In the rain with her." She strode toward them, heels sinking into the wet grass. "I did some digging. Did you know your precious architecture student dropped out last semester? Couldn't pay tuition after burning through her mother's insurance money. Very convenient timing to show up here, wouldn't you say?" Maya flinched as if struck. "That's private information." "Nothing's private when my brother's being taken advantage of," Claire snapped. "What was your plan? Seduce the grieving millionaire? You even got the look right, did you style yourself after Sarah's photos?" "Claire, stop," Blake commanded, but his sister was relentless. She's not even enrolled this semester, Blake. Everything she told you is a lie. I withdrew because I couldn't afford it, Maya said quietly. I've been saving from this job, trying to re-enroll. The LA scholarship would let me finish my degree, but I never. Never what? Claire demanded. Never meant to fall for my brother. Never meant to get caught. The rain poured now, matching the intensity of the moment. Blake looked between them, his sister, protecting him the only way she knew how, and Maya, who brought his house and his heart back to life. The board meeting, he said finally. Is it about the Robinson merger falling apart? Claire blinked, thrown by the change of subject. Yes, but that's not. It's falling apart because I pulled out last week, Blake continued. First decision I've made for myself since Sarah died. Maya helped me see that I was hiding behind work, behind grief, behind everything except what I actually wanted. He turned to Maya, who stood silent in the rain. The LA scholarship, take it if it's what you want. But don't take it because you think you're betraying someone, or because my sister did a background check. Sarah knew who you were, Maya. Maybe she knew who you'd be for me, too. Claire made a disgusted sound. This is exactly what she wants, Blake. She's manipulating your feelings for Sarah. No, Blake said firmly. She's helping me remember how to feel anything at all. He held out his hand to Maya. Stay. Not as my housekeeper. Not as anyone's replacement. Just, stay. The rain continued to fall as Maya looked at his extended hand, the weight of the silver necklace heavy against her throat, the weight of the moment heavy in her heart. The annual Thompson Technology Gala arrived 3 weeks after the garden confrontation. Blake adjusted his bow tie in the mirror, aware of how different he looked from the broken men who'd hired Maya months ago. The event space of the Fairmont Hotel glittered with San Francisco's tech elite, but his eyes kept finding Maya across the crowded room. She wore a simple black dress, nothing like Sarah's usual glamorous gowns. Her hair was pulled back, the silver necklace catching the light. She stood near a painting, discussing architectural theory with a senior developer, looking completely at ease despite the whispers that followed her. She cleans your house and now she's at the gala. Blake overheard one board member mutter to another. Thompson's lost his mind since Sarah died. Claire materialized at his elbow, champagne in hand. It's not too late to send her home, Blake. People are talking. Let them talk, Blake replied, watching Maya laugh at something the developer said. Her laugh was free, genuine, so different from the forced social laughter around them. She's wearing Sarah's necklace to our company's biggest event, Claire hissed. Do you have any idea how that looks? It's not Sarah's necklace anymore, Blake said firmly. You read the letter yourself. Claire's perfectly manicured nails tightened around her champagne flute. A convenient letter that proves nothing except that Sarah knew her art teacher. Everything else is just Maya's word. Before Blake could respond, Timothy Robinson, the merger partner he'd rejected, appeared. Blake. Quite a different date from last year's gala. His voice carried just far enough to draw attention. Although, the resemblance is remarkable. Tell me, does she clean up as well as she cleans house? Something snapped in Blake. But before he could respond, Maya was there, her presence calm but commanding. Mr. Robinson, she said smoothly, I heard about the merger falling through. Speaking of remarkable resemblances, I couldn't help but notice your new development plans look surprisingly similar to Blake's original designs from last year. Robinson's face reddened. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, Maya continued. I just find architecture fascinating, all those little details that most people miss. Blake showed me both proposals. The similarities are, what's the word? Remarkable. Robinson retreated, leaving Claire staring at Maya with newfound wariness. That was either very clever or very dangerous, she warned. It was true, Maya replied simply. I did see the proposals. The plagiarism was obvious. Blake felt pride and concern battle in his chest. Maya had just defended him and his company, but she'd also made a powerful enemy. Robinson's influence in the tech world was considerable. I need some air, Maya said quietly, heading toward the terrace. Blake moved to follow, but Claire grabbed his arm. Don't you dare go after her, Claire warned. You've already caused enough scandal tonight. Scandal? Blake pulled his arm free. The only scandal here is how quickly everyone's forgotten that Sarah wanted her art to mean something. She didn't care about galas or mergers. She cared about truth and beauty and... He stopped, realizing something. And that's exactly what Maya fights for too. Oh, spare me the romantic parallels, Claire scoffed. She's a college dropout playing dress-up in Sarah's world. No, Blake said firmly. She's herself. Faded, and Maya's departure became just another whispered story in Silicon Valley's endless gossip mill. On what would have been Sarah's birthday, Blake found himself driving to the cemetery. The November air was crisp, leaves crunching under his feet as he approached her grave. He hadn't been here since before Maya entered his life. I brought something, he said to the headstone, pulling out Sarah's diary, found in a box of her things he'd finally had the courage to open. I think you've been trying to tell me something all along. The diary's final entries told a story he hadn't known: Sarah's friendship with Elizabeth Chen, her secret visits to Maya's mother during her cancer treatment, her dreams for the art center. But it was the last entry, dated the day before her accident, that changed everything. Met Maya today, finally. Elizabeth's daughter has her mother's spirit, that rare ability to see beauty in broken things. She doesn't know I know Blake, doesn't know any of our plans. But watching her sketch in the cafe, talking about sustainable architecture and community spaces, I saw something remarkable. She has the same light I fell in love with in Blake, that passion to build something meaningful. If anything happens to me, morbid thought, I hope they meet. Not because they'd be perfect for each other, though they might, but because they both understand that love isn't about replacing what's lost, it's about building something new from the foundations that remain. Blake's hand shook as he read the final lines. Elizabeth gave Maya her favorite necklace today, my old one, from our gallery days. A perfect circle, connecting all of us in ways we don't yet understand. Life is funny that way. His phone buzzed. Claire, probably worried about his absence from the office. Instead, he found an email from Elizabeth Chen's old gallery. Subject: Time Capsule Discovery. The gallery was being renovated. Workers had found a sealed box behind a wall panel, dated to be opened on this exact day, Sarah's birthday. Inside, detailed plans for the art center, a letter from Sarah explaining everything, and photographs proving the timeline of her friendship with Elizabeth. Blake's vision blurred. Every accusation against Maya, every carefully constructed doubt, crumbled in the face of this concrete evidence. Sarah hadn't just known Maya, she'd envisioned a future that somehow, impossibly, had come to pass. Without thinking, he drove to the gallery. The renovations were extensive, but he recognized the bones of the space from Sarah's letters. Near the entrance, a worker handed him another envelope from the time capsule. Inside was a note in Sarah's handwriting. Blake, if you're reading this, either our surprise worked perfectly, in which case, surprise, or something happened and you found this later. Either way, remember, love isn't a betrayal of the past, it's a promise to the future. The art center was never just my dream. It was a bridge between what was and what could be. All my love, Sarah. His phone buzzed again. This time, a news alert: rising architect Maya Chen wins LA design competition with innovative community art space concept. The article included a photo. Maya stood before her winning design, the silver necklace catching the light. Her smile wasn't Sarah's smile, it was entirely her own, bright with achievement and tinged with something that looked like healing. Before he could second-guess himself, Blake dialed Claire's number. The art center, he said when she answered. Sarah's original plans. We're building it. Blake, Claire began, but he cut her off. No more interference, Claire. I have proof of everything: Sarah's diary, the time capsule, all of it. Maya was telling the truth. And it's time we all stopped being afraid of living. Silence, then a soft sigh. I kept something from you, Claire admitted. Maya sent back the necklace last week, with a letter explaining its history. I had it authenticated. The inscription, the dates, everything matches Sarah's story. Where is it now? My desk drawer. Blake. I'm sorry. I was so focused on protecting you from pain, I didn't see I was keeping you from healing. Blake looked around the gallery space, Sarah's final gift, a place where broken things could become beautiful again. Send me Maya's LA address, he said quietly. And Claire? Have the necklace courier delivered to her office. It's time for all of us to stop living in fear of ghosts. As he walked through the empty gallery, Blake could almost hear Sarah's laugh echoing off the walls, not a haunting sound anymore, but a blessing. Sometimes love doesn't end with goodbye. Sometimes it simply changes form, building new beauty from old foundations. And sometimes, if you're brave enough to trust it, it leads you exactly where you need to go.